Joining us live right now is Mahesh Jethmalani, who's leveled some very, very serious allegations. And this is, remember, a story Republic has tracked very closely. Good evening, sir, and thank you for speaking to us on Republic. The hashtag is China pays the BBC. Ever since the story broke, sir, about the BBC documentary series, everyone has been wondering about the timing, the agenda, and the key question, who's been funding. So what is it today that, you are alleging through this report that you have cited on your Twitter handle? What is the charge?
Well, I'm saying that the BBC is tainted because the money has come from an extremely tainted source that's very anti-India. And the BBC has a history of anti-India propaganda. In as late as 2021, it was hauled up by the Indian government for publishing a map of India without Kashmir, a truncated map. And it had to apologize, right? That would have been an opportune time for the ban to have been complete, but they're unrepentant. So, and they keep doing this all the time. As I said, there's a long history. I pointed it out in my first tweet this morning. I quoted another source, and it's undeniable that it happened. It's happened. They've taken on the Indian army. They vilified the Indian army. So, they are repeat offenders on this issue.
So, Mahesh Jethmalani, what you're saying is sensational, because this clearly means that there is an anti-India agenda clearly being driven by the BBC. And perhaps what we've seen through this documentary series could just be one amongst the many trailer. Now, why is this story today so important? Because it's not just about the BBC, the lies that it's trying to put out. It's also the other trap that the opposition wants to today fish in and use that, entire agenda to hit out at the Indian state. So there is a clear amount of politics being played. There is an attempt to divide and spread venom.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And, that the documentary, which the opposition, as you said, wants to take to court and sort of have it publicized, let the public view it, has many, many tainted features. For instance, it's based on a 2002 inquiry report, and it comes out in 2023. What was the sudden trigger for that? Right? They've completely suppressed the fact that they receive funding, that BBC receives funding from why? A state, almost an extension of the Chinese state, right? It banned in 2 countries because they are a security risk, our Quad allies, Australia and the USA, right? The UK itself, where BBC's head office is situated, has sanctioned Huawei and refused to let it participate in 5G trials. But what BBC does is, they don't take the money, and they don't air this propaganda in their parent country, right? So there's one thumb rule of broadcasting for their home audience, right? And another one for the away audience. For the away audience, they set up an entity called, I think, Storyworks, if I'm not mistaken. And please have a look at what Storyworks has been doing over the years, right? That's another scandal, right? And this has created an internal, disgruntlement within the BBC organization in the UK. One of the points of disgruntlement is that here is BBC coming out with a documentary about Chinese state persecution of the Uyghurs, the Uyghur community in China, in Xinjiang province, and they are then taking money from the very oppressors of those oppressed, whose cause they claim to be chanting. It is just such utter hypocrisy. Not only is it tainted with money, right? It is replete with hypocrisy.
And Mr. Jethmalani, there's so many important questions to, this entire sensational revelation that you've put out in the public domain, a story again that Republic has fronted for the last many, many days. I want to ask you one straight, direct question. Does this mean that China was actually using the BBC to attack India? And, there is obviously a lot of money that has exchanged hands for this propaganda, as you're alleging. So does this mean that China was using the BBC as a tool to target India?
Yes, There is a lot of evidence to suggest that. Now, I'll give you just one little teaser today, right? Since the matter is sub judice and I want to have some of this put in court before the Supreme Court, I wish all this had been done earlier. But since the matter is now sub judice, it's a matter of propriety not to say too much. But I will say this. Apart from the very dubious credentials about receiving money from a Chinese state entity, right? The source, the documentary relies substantially upon a 2002 inquiry report. That inquiry report conducted in India was by a gentleman called Jack Straw. Jack Straw is himself tainted with Chinese connections. More about that later, right? But he himself is tainted. And by the way, this Jack Straw was somebody, the foreign secretary, was somebody who was roundly condemned in the United Kingdom for being responsible for the creation of a false report on weapons of mass destruction, which enabled the UK to go into, or actually was meant to facilitate the UK going into Iraq, right? And he has some other scandals as well, right? Including receiving funds from a Chinese shell company. He is the author of the 2002 documentary, and the 2000 documentary, right, the report which it relies upon, is substantially his creation.
Now, Mr. Jethmalani, I just want to pick up from this point that you have made. So this is alarming. If you have the Chinese firm Huawei that is being funding the BBC. Now, they have been banned in so many nations. So, I mean, why was this even happening? The BBC, obviously, like we say, no one even watches this. There is no question of the credibility of the BBC. But there is also the opposition link to this. And, this is something that you had referred earlier in one of your tweets about Jairam Ramesh and, his alleged close links to Huawei. So why has the Congress party been wanting to push this propaganda that is clearly not just anti-India, but it's driven by, the Chinese money there?
Because the Congress party is no more now than a lobby organization. It lobbies, it lobbies for arms. It lobbies. It is now basically, a lobby for the Chinese state. It's no more than that. If you look at all the comments that have been coming, and I've been piecing them together.
Then do you not believe today? I think the Congress party should come out and respond. They should tell us whether a Jairam Ramesh had links with Huawei, whether, he was trying to push Huawei. And that's the same company that today you've exposed had, this entire mandate to only, propagate anti-India material, something that the BBC already has begun. What's your question today to the Congress, sir? What would you say?
First, establish your pro-India, your nationalistic bona fides, right? I'm saying, I'm choosing my words. Establish that you are indeed a party that is loyal to India, and come out with that 2008 MOU document, which you signed, which Xi Jinping in the background, right? Which you signed with the Communist Party of China. Come out with it. The nation needs to know the contents of that document. Otherwise, the suspicion will always be there that in that MOU, for some reason, you are beholden to China.
So then, Mr. Jethmalani, my follow-up question is, do you think that the Congress has been peddling the Huawei-backed propaganda? Somewhere clearly they have to speak up today and respond whether this is right or not. I mean, that's the least that they should do. And, as we are having this conversation, I'm told that there are, viewers calling in, they want to speak to you, and they say what you're saying right now on national television for the very first time is huge and sensational.
Yeah, but, it's up to the government now to pick up the cudgels. There's enough information out there. There is overwhelming evidence about linkages in this matter between the BBC, the Congress party. There is overwhelming, it just has to be ferreted out. And it's unimpeachable evidence. They will not be able to deny it, right? For a start, let's just focus on that. There is a contractual relationship, we know, between the Congress party, on whose behalf that contract was signed by Rahul Gandhi with the Chinese Communist Party, right? So for a start, please reveal that at least. What is your hesitation in revealing that document and its contents?
Now, Mr. Jethmalani, I'm tempted to ask you this. Many here, like we at Republic, are calling them the usual suspects who've landed up in the Supreme Court. Why? Because they are standing with the BBC. They are standing with this propaganda. They clearly do not want to talk about these links and these revelations that you today have put out in the public domain, but they want the Supreme Court to, be talking about this documentary and say this should be shown to everyone. I mean, what's your message today to all of them?
Yeah. I have a feeling that this, I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, right? But this sounds a little like, just sheer politics, but a little bit of reckless politics, because you have taken the BBC at face value, right? Before you rely upon a source, you should have done some due diligence. Firstly, why is it coming out in 2023? You are ignoring that, right? Because you are anti-Modi, right? B, has the BBC any Chinese connections? Now that I put you to notice, right? Unless you think I'm a madman, right? But my source is a spectator in the UK, a periodical in the UK. So now that you've been put on notice that there is some long-standing funding going on by Huawei with this organization, with the BBC, right? Please tell me, right? Does that worry you, right? Do you think there's some conflict of interest? China being an enemy country till today, right? And the BBC taking money from a state-owned, state-controlled telecom enterprise. Is there any conflict between that and what is being put out today, which is anti-India and suits China's interests? Does that worry you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you've made these extremely important points, Mahesh Jethmalani. And, like I said, a lot of our callers are calling into our newsrooms. They want to speak to you. Till we get one of this caller live. Now, his name is Kalpesh Shah. He's wanting to ask you a question from Mumbai. But before I put that question, I want to ask you one more question. Because we've spoken about BBC. We've spoken about the agenda. We've spoken about the money. There is a Chinese connection. There is a Congress connection. Now, not very long ago, you would recall that Rahul Gandhi himself, when whatever was happening at the LAC and when you had, our army literally pushing back and making the PLA troops run, he said, "Hamare jo soldiers hai, wo pit rahe hain." And, obviously everyone remembers that at the height of Doklam, you had Rahul Gandhi whining and dining with the, ambassador from Beijing. I want you to just connect the dots. Help us understand. Where does this story go? How